Afam stood frozen as she took a step back, turning around slowly, showing off her fine clothes and jewelry. Do I look like someone born to suffer? Please go and manage yourself with your wife, she sneered. You're even lucky she hasn't left you. Afam's heart sank. He could not believe what he was hearing. So, this is how life is, he muttered. After all I did for you, Adora, this is how you repay me. Once upon a time, in a very beautiful and peaceful African village called Okozo, lived a young man named Afam. Afam was a very good-looking man. In fact, he was said to be breathtakingly handsome. His tall, muscular frame and captivating smile could stop anyone in their tracks. And Afam, he was fully aware of it. In fact, he did not hesitate to use his charm to his advantage. The maidens of Okozo adored him, and Afam, always eager to play the game of love, enjoyed their attention. He moved through the village with a confident air, flashing his dazzling smile at every beautiful maiden who crossed his path. They blushed, giggled, and talked about him, their hearts fluttering whenever he was near. Afam enjoyed their admiration, but he never let himself get too attached to anyone. For him, it was all just fun, all the way. Afam was the only son of Chief Ozoemena, the wealthiest farmer in all of Okozo. Chief Ozoemena owned land that stretched as far as the eyes could see. If you stood at one end, it would seem like the land never ended, disappearing into the horizon. The chief had countless workers, strong, able-bodied men who tended to his vast acres of yam and cassava. The gods had blessed his hands. For year after year, his harvests were nothing short of bountiful. People from neighboring towns would travel great distances just to buy from him, and his name was known far and wide. But Chief Ozoemena's wealth did not just fall from the sky. No, he came from a long line of farmers and had worked tirelessly just as his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather before him. Farming was in his blood, and with the blessings of the gods, his efforts had paid off. His name was respected not only in Okozo but in all the surrounding villages. However, Afam was nothing like his father. He was nothing close to his father. The only thing he seemed to have inherited from Chief Ozoemena was his striking looks. While his father woke up before dawn, overseeing the work on the farm and managing the men who worked for him, Afam preferred to sleep in. He had no interest in the farming or hard work. The thought of dirtying his hands in the soil made him shudder. One afternoon, as Chief Ozoemena stood at the edge of his vast land, watching the workers tend to the crops, he called out to his son. "Come here," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Afam lazily strolled over his hands tucked casually into his pockets. "Yes, father," he replied, barely masking his disinterest. Chief Ozoemena frowned. "Look at this land, Afam. One day, all this will be yours. The harvests, the wealth, the respect. It will all pass to you." Afam glanced at the sprawling fields, but his mind was elsewhere. "Yes, father," he said absently. The chief sighed deeply. "But a man must work hard for what he has." He continued, "The gods may bless the land, but it is the farmer's hand that brings forth the harvest. Laziness will bring nothing but shame." Afam shrugged, feeling less concerned. "The land will still be here when I'm ready, father. There's no rush." Chief Ozoemena shook his head, worry etched on his face. He knew that Afam was not the man to carry on the family's legacy, but he could only hope that one day his son would understand the value of hard work. For now, though, Afam was content with being the village heartthrob, with no intention of following in his father's footsteps. If you were looking for Afam, there were two places where you could find him. He would either be at the village square, lounging with his friends, watching the maidens dance and laughing heartily, or at the palm wine spot, where he drank to his heart's content. Afam enjoyed sitting with the other young men, bragging about his father's wealth. He would order keg after keg of palm wine, calling out to the owner to bring more, while the young men around him sang his praises. "Afam, the son of a great man," they would shout, "the future chief of Okozo." Afam would smile broadly, basking in their flattery. He knew that as long as he kept the drinks flowing, they would keep hailing him. Deep down, Afam never really thought about what it all meant. His carefree attitude and lack of ambition troubled his father so much. Since Afam's mother had passed away a few years ago after a brief illness, Chief Ozoemena had been even more worried. His health was failing, and he knew his time on earth was short. But his greatest fear wasn't his own death, but what would become of Afam when he was no more? What would become of all that he has toiled and worked so hard to build? How would his son survive without the discipline of work ethic? He needed to manage the vast lands. How would he be able to do that? One day, an idea struck him. Perhaps marriage would make Afam more responsible. If he had a wife, the chief thought, he might become more serious, settle down, and act like the man he was born to be. But when he mentioned this plan to Afam, the young man burst into laughter. "Marriage? Ha, me? Father, I'm not ready to tie myself down to one maiden when there are so many to enjoy." Chief Ozoemena frowned, but knew that he had to take charge. Afam was not going to change on his own. And so, the chief made up his mind and went ahead to find a wife for his son. He chose Kamsi, a beautiful maiden with a dazzling smile and a kind heart. Afam, of course, was attracted to her beauty. How could he resist? But even though he loved the way Kamsi looked, she wasn't enough to tame his wild heart. Afam continued to flirt with other maidens, openly chasing after any girl that caught his eye. He did not treat Kamsi poorly, but then he did not hide his affairs either. It was as if he did not care about her feelings, nor did he feel the need to respect their marriage. Kamsi was miserable, but she kept her sorrow to herself. For in Okuzo, a wife was expected to endure as long as her husband provided for her and did not harm her physically. Complaining wasn't even seen as an option. At this point, Chief Ozoemena had tried everything, but Afam had refused to change. One day, Afam's best friend, Obiora, who has also been troubled about his friend's way of life, pulled him aside. "Afam, you can't live like this forever," Obiora said earnestly. "What will happen when your father is no longer here?" Afam smiled, leaning back into his chair. "Obi, you worry too much. Wait, so you expect me to work under the hot sun, sweating like a common laborer, or worse, stick to one woman? Ha! My father has made more than enough money for me. I will live comfortably for the rest of my life, even if I don't lift a finger." Obiora shook his head. "And what if that wealth doesn't last forever, Afam? What will you do then?" Afam laughed. "Obi, you clearly don't understand. My father's wealth is more than enough. If you want to be serious and tie yourself down, go ahead. But as for me, I'll enjoy my life to the fullest." And enjoy his life he did. He continued to spend his days in the village square, at the palm wine spot, and chasing after maidens, thinking nothing of the future. But one fateful morning, something happened that would change Afam's life forever. The village awoke with the first light of dawn. But Chief Ozoemena did not wake. His spirit had journeyed to the great beyond in the silence of the night, leaving Afam alone to face the world without his father's guiding hand. The entire village of Okozo mourned deeply for the passing of Chief Ozoemena. He was a man of great stature, known far and wide, and his burial was as grand as his life had been. Drummers filled the air with rhythmic beats, and the elders poured libations, praying for his peaceful journey to the ancestors. His burial was a celebration of life, a life well lived, and every corner of the village and the neighboring towns honored his existence. But as with everything in life, time moved on. The village returned to its usual daily activities, and so did Afam. With his father gone, Afam became even more reckless. There was nothing to hold him back now, not even the sadness in the eyes of his young wife, Kamsi. She watched helplessly as her husband continued to gallivant through the village, flaunting the wealth his father had left behind. It was as if Chief Ozoemena's death had opened the floodgates of Afam's waywardness to pour out. Afam's reputation as the most handsome and carefree man in Okuzo grew. Maidens still flocked around him, and Afam soaked up the attention. But soon, he became captivated by one maiden in particular, a fair-skinned beauty named Adora. Her charm and elegance were unmatched, and Afam could not resist her. He quickly made up his mind that Adora would become his second wife. Adora was flattered by Afam's wealth and persistent attention. She agreed to marry him. "But you must give me time," she said, smiling sweetly. "I need to get used to the idea of becoming a wife." "Take all the time you need, Adora," Afam said, grinning from ear to ear. "I will wait for you, my beauty." In the meantime, Afam showered her with gifts, expensive clothes, beautiful beads, and anything her heart desired. The people of Okuzo gossiped among themselves, wondering how long Afam's reckless spending would last. But no one dared to say it in his face. One way or the other, they all benefited from his recklessness. Obiora, his loyal friend, once again tried to talk sense into him. "Afam, my friend, don't you think you are going too far? Your father's wealth will not last forever if you continue like this. The farm is abandoned. The workers have all left, and you are spending money as if it will never run out." But Afam only laughed, waving his hand dismissively. "Obi, you make me laugh. Do you think I will ever run out of wealth? My father left me enough to last a lifetime. Besides, I am enjoying myself, and isn't that what life is all about?" Obiora sighed. He had tried countless times, but it seemed Afam was beyond saving. Nothing could change his friend's mind. While Afam continued to live a life of luxury, the reality of his situation was unfolding behind his back. The vast lands that once flourished under his father's care lay abandoned. Weeds grew tall where yams once thrived, and the farmhands who had worked tirelessly for Chief Ozoemena had all left. They could no longer wait for the wages that never came, and so they moved elsewhere to seek greener pastures, leaving Afam's estate to slowly wither. Weeks passed, and Afam remained blissfully unaware of the disaster brewing. He kept spending lavishly, buying Adora more gifts, and enjoying the attention of his friends and admirers. But one morning, Afam woke up to find that the treasure chest had run dry. There was no more money to spend. And worse, when he turned to the farms for yams to sell, there was nothing. The once bountiful fields were empty, and the barns bare. Afam's heart sank. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions. It became clear to him that he had squandered everything, and now he stood at the edge of ruin. But by this time, he had become deeply accustomed to his reckless life. he could not imagine living any other way. So even with no money left, he clung to his old habits. He started borrowing from anyone who would lend him and buying drinks on promises he had no intention of keeping. At first, people indulged him because of his status as Chief Ozoemena's son. They gave him any amount of money he asked for, assuming that he had a means to pay back. But as the debts piled up, the rumors started to spread. It wasn't long before everyone knew the truth. Afam was broke. Both the maidens and the elders started to whisper among themselves, "Ha! Chief Ozoemena must be rolling in his grave right now," an elder would say while shaking his head in disbelief. How could a man as wise and hardworking as Chief Ozoemena end up with a son like Afam? Others would murmur. But what Afam did not expect was how quickly people turned their backs on him. The same friends who once crowded around him, hailing his name and singing his praises, began to disappear. None of them offered to help, and not one of them would even buy him a cup of palm wine. Even Okoro, the owner of the palm wine spot where Afam had spent most of his time, refused to give him a drop for free. The maidens, who once enjoyed his company, started making a caricature of him. His presence, which they once enjoyed, suddenly became a disturbance. No wonder, they say, that a man is only as attractive as his pockets. It was then that Afam realized the bitter truth. No one, absolutely no one, cared about him. They had only been there around for the good times, for the drinks, and whatever it was they could get from him. And now that he had nothing to offer, they vanished like the morning mist. But the final blow came from Adora, the woman he had once lavished with gifts, the one he dreamed of making his second wife. One evening, desperate and feeling cornered, Afam approached her, hoping she would show him some form of kindness. "Adora, please, I know things are not the way they used to be, but I can still make things right. You know I care about you. I still want to marry you," Afam said, his voice low and pleading. Adora laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "Marry me? Afam, are you still dreaming? You are not serious at all. Oh. Wait, you mean you are still dreaming of marrying me?" Afam stood frozen as she took a step back, turning around slowly, showing off her fine clothes and jewelry. "Do I look like someone born to suffer? Please go and manage yourself with your wife," she sneered. "You're even lucky she hasn't left you." Afam's heart sank. He could not believe what he was hearing. "So this is how life is," he muttered. "After all I did for you, Adora, this is how you repay me." She shook her head with a smirk. Afam, no one is repaying anything. I'm just telling you the truth. Everyone in this village knows that you are too lazy to work like a man. So tell me, how do you plan to take care of me? Without another word, Adora turned and walked away, leaving Afam standing there, stunned and alone. The truth of his situation hit him hard. He had squandered his wealth, his reputation, and now even the affection of those around him. Life had indeed turned its back on him, and he had no one to blame but himself. Afam's life had hit rock bottom. He had no money, no real friends, and the only two people who stayed by his side were his loyal best friend, Obiora, and his devoted wife, Kamsi. When things had become unbearable, when the hunger and the suffering had become too much, Kamsi had to take matters into her own hands. With the little money she had saved, she started a small vegetable business. Every morning before dawn, she would go to the nearby villages to buy fresh vegetables and resell them at the market. Her small business barely kept food on the table, but she was determined to survive. Despite her efforts, friends and family urged Kamsi to leave Afam. He's not worth it, her friends would tell her. Even her own parents insisted she return home before it was too late. But Kamsi stood her ground. What kind of woman would I be if I left now? She would say. Yes, Afam is responsible for his own downfall, but leaving him when he's at his lowest wouldn't make me any better. Besides, what man would want to marry me if they hear I abandoned my husband because he lost everything? Her sister Dumebi wasn't convinced. Afam did not just lose everything, Kamsi. He squandered all his father's wealth, she shot back. Kamsi sighed. However you see it, I believe that Afam can still bounce back. He just needs a push. Unknown to them, Afam had been listening to their conversation. For the first time, he was deeply touched by Kamsi's loyalty. This was the same woman he had treated with neglect. The same woman who had quietly suffered as he flaunted his affairs. Yet, here she was, standing up for him, believing in him when even he did not believe in himself. Later that evening, as they sat down to eat the little food Kamsi had managed to scrap together, Afam could not take his eyes off her. Kamsi, he said quietly, I heard your conversation with Dumebi earlier. Thank you for staying by my side and believing in me. Kamsi looked up at him, her expression hard. I did not say all that to make you feel better, Afam, she snapped. I said it for my sake. You should have learned your lesson by now and gotten back on your feet. But you sit around feeling sorry for yourself all day. Let me make one thing clear. This little business I'm running cannot sustain us forever. And for your information, I am with child. So it's time you stood up and started acting like a man. Afam's heart stopped at her words. Kamsi was pregnant. If he had anything to say in the first place, the weight of all he had just heard made everything vanish from his head. His recklessness and past crashed down on him. His wasted fortune, his unborn child. Afam could barely speak. That night, he could not sleep. Kamsi's words echoed in his head, reminding him of all the warnings his late father had given him. He wished more than anything that he had listened. The next morning, Afam made his way to Obiora's house, his face edged with worry. Obi, I don't know what to do anymore. Kamsi is pregnant, and this whole situation is getting worse every day. Obiora looked at his friend with compassion, but did not hold back. Afam, you already know what I'll say. I warned you, but that's in the past. What matters now is what you do next. You need to drop this fine boy act and face reality. Pick up your hoe and cutlass and go into your farm. Afam sighed, his voice heavy with defeat. But Obi, how now? Obi, look at me. How can I go into the farm? Okay, let's now even assume I want to go to the farm. I don't have any money to hire workers. No seedlings. Nothing. And the villagers will laugh at me. The maidens will mock me. A whole me. Obiora burst out into laughter. Laugh at you. They will laugh harder when Kamsi gives birth and you can't afford even a piece of clothes for the baby. Look, Afam, I'm willing to help. I'll come with you to cultivate a portion of land and I'll even lend you money to buy yam seedlings. But that's only if you're serious about working. That's only if you're willing to do anything to lift your fingers and work like a man. Afam stared at his friend for a long time. Finally, he realized he had no choice. I'll do it, he said quietly. 2 days later, to the shock of the entire village, Afam, once the proud, reckless spender, picked up his hoe and cutlass and headed into his father's farm with Obiora by his side. The laughter and gossips followed him, but this time, Afam was determined. He had a family to care for, and he would do whatever it took to make things right. The land was vast, and clearing it seemed like an endless task for Afam and Obiora. They worked slowly, with Afam adjusting to the labor. It took them 3 long days to clear just a few plots. So on the 4th day, they decided to start making ridges. But that day, something extraordinary happened. While digging, Afam's hoe struck something hard. At first, he thought it was just a stone, but the sound was different. He hit the ground again, and the noise echoed through the field. Curious, Afam knelt down and started clearing the sand around the area. To his amazement, there it was, an old iron box that belonged to his father. His heart pounded as he signaled to Obiora, who rushed over. Together, They dug out the box. It was heavy and rusted in places. With trembling hands, Afam managed to pry it open, and what they saw inside left them speechless. The box was filled with money, gleaming coins that sparkled under the sunlight. Afam's heart raced as he realized what had happened. His late father, Chief Ozoemena, had known his son too well. Knowing that Afam would squander his wealth, the wise chief had buried this treasure in the farm, where only hard work could uncover it. The realization hit Afam like a ton of bricks. If he had not finally decided to work, this treasure would have remained hidden forever. Overcome with emotion, Afam fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He was no longer crying over his poverty or the loss of his fortune. This time, his tears were for the deep regrets and shame he felt for being so reckless and failing to heed his father's wisdom. Obiora placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your father always believed in you, Afam. He left this for you to find whenever you were ready." Afam nodded, unable to speak. He now realized that the true treasure wasn't just the money in the box. It was the lesson his father had given him. His father's final test had not only saved him from complete ruin, but had also taught him the value of hard work, responsibility, and humility. This marked a turning point in Afam's life. With the money in his hands, he could easily have returned to his old reckless ways. But something had changed within him. The lessons of his father, his wife's unwavering loyalty, and the support of his best friend, Obiora. He decided that this money would not be squandered. Instead, he would invest it in restoring the farm to his former glory. With the help of Obiora, Afam hired back the workers he had neglected, paid off his debts, and focused on rebuilding everything he had lost. He also began to treat Kamsi, his wife, with the love and respect she deserved, recognizing her as his true partner and the pillar of his strength. When the villagers heard about Afam's new fortune, they marveled. His so-called friends, who had abandoned him, started to jubilate, positive that his old habits would continue. Even the maidens, who had deserted him, started giving him their attention whenever he walked through the village. Adora would not stop trying to get his attention. But Afam had learned his lesson and was a changed man. He ignored all their fake love and attention. The village, which once mocked him, began to respect him. A few months later, Kamsi, his beautiful wife, went into labor, and shortly after, their child was finally born. Afam, his heart filled with joy, looked into the eyes of his newborn son. There and then, he vowed to raise him with the same wisdom and love his father had once tried to instill in him. As time passed, Afam became successful, just like his father and fathers before. His name spread far and wide, beyond the hills of Okuzo. He and Kamsi filled their compound with more children, and they continued to live in peace together, happily ever after. Hey lovers, thank you for listening to this story. If you are new here, welcome to our community. I hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you have not done so already, please hit the subscribe button, and to support the growth of our community, give this video a big thumbs up. If you have learned something, please let us know in the comment section. And if you know someone who may benefit from this story, do not hesitate to share. I'll take my leave now, but I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.